Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, the purpose of this show is to build a world with better bosses, and we do that by learning from the greatest minds working in leadership today. Whether you're new to leadership or a seasoned pro, you're going to get practical information to help you lead with confidence. Today's episode is brought to you by my sponsors, the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, Cadre of Men, and Pharaoh Skincare. Check out the show notes for links to our sponsors and all of my books. Today, we're talking about how to unlock the potential of your employees, and we have a special guest with us today, Pam August. Pam mastered the art of building an impactful company culture as Director of Culture Activation at WestJet in Canada. WestJet is well known for its people-first climate, which employs employee engagement, collaboration, and a deep sense of caring. Pam tells us that any leader can use culture to unlock the potential of employees for a massive impact. Now, I love this conversation, and I know you will as well. So are you ready to dive in? Let's get started. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Pam August. Pam is a sought-after speaker, facilitator, coach, and co-creator with a strong foundation of lifelong learning. She guides organizations, teams, and leaders to unlock existing potential for transformational results. She was the Director of Culture Activation at WestJet, one of Canada's most admired corporate cultures. Today, she's a trusted partner for high-performance organizations around the world through her firm, Connecting Potential. With deep and diverse experience, she knows what it takes to uncover, align, and activate the best of what organizations already offer and what they can develop into. She is the author of Potential: How to Connect What's Already There for Exponential Impact, and I am excited to have her on the show to learn from her leadership experience. So, Pam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It is so great to be here with you.
It is great to meet you, and I'm excited to talk about the idea of potential because I think I get a sense that we're going to love talking about it because I love the idea of unleashing the potential of our team. So, and you being the expert in this area, I'm really excited about it. So, talk to us a little bit. I mentioned your company is called Connecting Potential. What do you mean by connect potential? What do those two words mean?
Yeah, and the name, the name of my company is really the name of my work in the
Mm.
world because I have a fundamental belief that we all have the need to connect or bring together the capacity to develop or become, which is potential. And so, what I'm about in the world and what I'm up to is really helping individuals, teams, and organizations do that. Connect it, bring it together, develop and become. And it's one of those things that I found through, I spent a lot of my career working inside of organizations, and the last 6 years now working with organizations. And in all of those experiences, I found that this thing called potential lives simultaneously in three dimensions. It lives within us as individuals, it lives between us in our relationships and teams, and it lives around us in this thing called culture. And because those dimensions are all connected, when you influence any one of them, you actually influence every one of them.
Mm.
And then as I was forming the performance practice that I now lead and operate in the world, I realized partly because I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I've done a lot of different things in my career, is that I actually have a lot of experience in all three of those dimensions.
Mm.
As a leadership coach, I was a faculty member in higher education for a number of years here in Canada. I was actually a trained nutritionist to start,
Oh,
and I
wow.
realized that I didn't care what people ate. So that was a little bit of a career limiting move. What I was really fascinated about, though, is how do people learn?
Mm.
And how do we learn together?
Mm.
Right. So that was my first foray into this notion of potential, was in this like learning potential. And I very quickly saw that how we learn as individuals is not separate from how we learn with others. And that's not separate from the conditions that are around us in learning. And that was where really, I would say more unconsciously than consciously, I started realizing I want to work in all three dimensions because they
Mm.
all work together. Did that in my work at WestJet Airlines, where I worked in leadership development. I worked in team effectiveness. I worked in cross-functional collaboration. My final role is I was the director of culture, where my job was to help WestJetters, we at that time that I left, we had 11,000 employees, align action and culture with strategy. And then that carried forth into the work that I do now as a coach, educator, consultant, author, and speaker.
Absolutely love that. One of the things that you mentioned that's part of learning and the potential, as you mentioned, is the piece of culture. I think it's the one that we don't really talk about enough, but it's interesting that WestJet consciously said we are going to manage the culture. Like we're going to put somebody, a senior leader, in charge of the culture, and that's eye-opening and refreshing because I worked for three global companies that didn't seem to acknowledge the fact that culture is essential for an organization. How did they come about recognizing and realizing that culture was so important to the operation of WestJet?
Well, I would say, back in the early days, so early being 1996 when WestJet formed, they really looked south of the border to our friends
Mm,
in the US and looked at Southwest Airlines
mm,
and saw what Southwest was doing. And really what started even before the culture piece was, Canada, vast geography, sparse population relative to landmass. Air travel was just unaffordably expensive for most people. And so WestJet looked to Southwest Airlines as a model of bringing low cost travel. And at the same time, Southwest Airlines, the culture really stood out
mm,
about creating an experience that was inexpensive but didn't feel cheap because of how people were treated.
mm.
And so I actually joined WestJet when WestJet was 8 years old
Oh, wow.
in 2004. So it was like working at an 8-year-old. And it was a very immature organization with a ton of energy and not really a lot of experience. And what I saw at the time though is that people that, when you got a job at WestJet, you didn't get a job at WestJet, you became a WestJetter.
Mm,
So right away there was this huge sense of identity. And so what I also saw though, and this started right from when I started back, I was at WestJet from 2004 till 2019. And that's significant because we know what happened to aviation in 2020,
mhm.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And so it was one of those I kept hearing people say, we're losing our culture, we're losing our culture, we're losing our culture. To which I started to say, well, where did it go?
Mm,
Is it under the table? Is it in my backpack? Oh, wait, it's over there in the corner. Because to your point, culture is a word that doesn't mean a lot, but means a lot of things, different things to a lot of different people.
yes.
And so what I heard when WestJetters were saying we're losing our culture was a belief that they had that culture was a thing that somebody gave them or
Mm,
somebody took away. And that was troubling because the reality is that culture is a dynamic that is continually co-created in every
yes.
action, every interaction, every day, whether we pay attention to it or not.
Yes.
And so it was, and I always say it's not the three P's, it's not picnic, it's ping pong and potlucks. Although we had so many potlucks at WestJet, I felt like we needed to ask on an interview, question, what did you bring to your last three potlucks? And if the answer was quinoa salad, you were not hired. No, I'm just kidding. As a nutritionist, I fully support quinoa salad. And so then it became my mission at WestJet in the work that I was doing is to really help nudge culture, which is if strategy is what gives us direction and guides us, culture is the dynamic that drives us when it's aligned. When there's misalignment between the two, that's where the Peter Drucker saying comes, culture eats strategy for breakfast,
Right. Right.
right? And so that really became I didn't go into WestJet to lead culture. I went to WestJet really with my learning background of to help people learn, but at its core, culture is a system of learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And we don't learn from the values posters on the wall or the screensavers or the swag. We learn from the ways that things really happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I spent, my early days on a submarine under the ocean,
Can't even
for
imagine.
5 years, and it was a unique culture there, and it was, I guess the best way to describe it is positive peer pressure, like
Mm.
for learning and for developing and being what we called qualified. So they
Mhm.
would say that if you weren't qualified in all areas and systems on the ship, you were what's called a nub, and that was a non-useful body. And so it was a high
Wow.
level of positive peer pressure to become valuable and to become qualified. And so when you stepped into, and it wasn't written down anywhere, but you stepped on a submarine, suddenly
Mm.
you're in a culture where everyone's looking to say, look, I need to make sure that you have my back when things go wrong on this submarine because we're it. We operate, hundreds of miles offshore, hundreds of feet below the surface. I need to know that you have my back. And so there was this positive peer pressure of excellence and qualification that was very strong, and I loved it. But I remember coming into to the business world looking for that, and it did not exist in the companies I worked for. There wasn't this positive peer pressure to become excellent.
Yeah, well, and if and please, I mean, I'm afraid to put my head underwater. I could not imagine going into a submarine. I just get claustrophobic thinking about it. But it is one of those ones where just if I think about submarine as the container of your culture, right? Like you had this very, really, quite honestly, specific pressurized
Mm,
container
yeah,
that created natural conditions for that to happen.
exactly.
And it's kind of like, cooking with an instant pot, for example, just as
Right.
completely shifting metaphors for a moment. When the pressure comes off, there's not as much happening. And the
Yeah.
reality is in the business world, and it's not unlike in aviation. I used to when I worked for WestJet, if there was room if the flight was full. Are you hearing some background noise? There.
No.
Speaking pressure. Okay, good. When if the flight was full and I was flying standby, we could fly up in the flight deck. And what I would always witness with our pilots, it was so interesting, first of all, to see their rituals and their routines and everything and the checklists and all of the things that happen. And it would be the sterile flight deck, so below 10,000 feet. There's no casual conversation. There's no conversation that is not focused on execution. Once you hit 10,000 feet, shoulder belt comes off, lunch bag comes out, seats move back, right? Pressure is off, and the dynamic changes quite significantly.
Yeah.
And then you'd be in the flight for however long, and then you'd be coming, approaching 10,000 to land, and it would be the same, right? Everything would change because the pressure's on. And the reality is in the regular course of business, we could never operate in that kind of pressurized environment all of the time,
Right. Right. Yeah.
right? So then the question becomes, and I know Patrick Lencioni talks about this a lot with the thematic goal. What's the rallying cry? Because what he did is he studied emergency response crews and things like that. And in the emergency, when the pressure's on, they come together like nothing else. The challenge becomes when the pressure's off. So
Yeah.
how do you create that same kind of dynamic and affect of what you described as real accountability? It was
Yeah.
interesting. I was in a conversation with one of my leadership team clients today, and I actually can't stand the word accountability because of the way we use it.
Mm,
We say they need to be held accountable. You weren't accountable, versus what accountability really means is what you said. I can count on you to have my back, and you can count on me to have yours.
exactly.
Right? It's not something we put on others. It is a promise that we make and a promise we expect.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that nails it completely. And it was and again, it was, I always say that there was a shared vulnerability in a submarine, which meant that it had to be a shared responsibility. for excellence. So I think we came together, and we operated together very well because of this shared vulnerability, right? So we expected a lot from each other. And I love that part of it. And I've always tried to put that into the business I've run, which is that we
Mhm.
hold each other accountable for, for excellence. And we work together for the common good of the organization, to achieve the mission, and all of us basically contributing our best efforts towards that mission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And in a lot of day-to-day work and a lot, in the world of business, that mission becomes really fuzzy.
Very.
That mission becomes very distant,
Yeah.
right? And so, that is a lot of the work that I do with, I did in WestJet, and I do with all the organizations that I work with, is help to make the mission matter.
Mm.
Because I find again in a lot of the corporate world, we spend a lot of time having things make sense. It's logical, it's data driven, right? The ROI, the bottom line, all of that, yes, that makes sense. It speaks to the head. But human engagement is actually has much more affect to it.
Mm.
Commitment is a feeling. I don't think I'm committed. I feel commitment. And that comes from a different region. And that comes not when things make sense. It comes from when they're meaningful and when they matter. And people only bring their best contribution when they know they're meaningful and they know they matter.
Yes. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's so true. Absolutely true. So let's kind of get back to a little bit of the idea of potential in teams. So
Hmm.
what are some of the core frameworks that you have discovered that really helps unlock like a team's potential?
Yeah, I would say, I have discovered, I've codified, I've articulated, and it's actually the framework that I teach in my book.
Okay.
And so I can speak to it super clearly is what I have found, again, in working with thousands of individuals and hundreds of teams and organizations, is that we need to have the right mindset to
Hmm.
connect potential. And too often we operate in a problem mindset. So the first thing in the framework is to shift our mindset from problem to potential. And it's not, here's the thing, it is not that problems don't exist. And it's not that we don't need to address and solve problems.
Mm.
I mean, that's basically what I do in every piece of work I do is I help organizations solve problems. The problem with the problem mindset is if it becomes our mindset that what we're always here to do is focus on problems, that's all we see is problems.
Yeah.
And then what happens is when there's something like conflict, as an example, well, that's a problem. Whereas in the work I do as a systems facilitator and systems coach, relationship systems, conflict is just a signal something wants to happen. And that thing that wants to happen, that's what I frame as potential. Right? If someone is showing up frustrated, well, what wants to happen for this person?
Mm.
If a team is showing up misaligned, what wants to happen for this team? That's the potential. So there's a lot of work I do and what I teach in the book around shifting your mindset from problem to potential. And one of my favorite questions coming back to my learning background is, oh, here's the problem I'm facing. A question that can right away shift your mindset is, what do I want to learn from this?
Mm.
What am I learning through this? What have I learned through this? And so there's this shift around mindset. And then the reality is as well, is that brains don't roll into work. We tend to, just like we tend to focus on problems too much, we tend to focus on above the ears solutions too often,
Mm. Yes.
meaning logic. We attempt to logic our way through messy complexity. Logic works well in complication where expertise is required, right? Like operating a submarine, highly complicated. There's a lot of expertise that is required there, that once you have the prerequisite expertise, you can troubleshoot and predict with a reasonable degree of certainty, if this happens and I do this, then this will be the result. Human systems, though, are complex, meaning they are unpredictable and emergent.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how many times I myself, when I've led teams, have done a leadership air quote best practice, and it failed abysmally. Right? I
Yeah.
did all the things, and I got it because human beings, we are emotional. And so, and human systems are complex, meaning we can't logic our way through them. And so that's why I really spend a lot of time with organizations that I work with, and just myself in my own work, is really tuning into what I call the whole operating system, which is our capacity as humans to think, to feel, emote, and to take action. And so that operating system is really a core of the approach that I use, which leads to the core practice, which it has three parts, no surprise, because three is a magic number. So we'll just play along here for a moment. John, I'll ask you to finish the statement. Location, location,
Location.
earth, wind, end,
Fire.
blood, sweat, end,
Tears.
right? How many bears?
I think there's three.
Yeah. I'll huff and I'll puff.
Blow the house down.
Yeah, right? Like three is a magic number.
Mm.
And I did a little research on this, and by research I mean the Google Chat GPT, all of those kinds of things. And three is a magic number because it's the smallest unit that forms a pattern.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And as human beings, we're pattern makers because our operating systems like to conserve energy when we need it for a real emergency.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And so this practice that I realized in retrospect, I codified it through writing the book. And then I realized it's probably been the practice dynamic I've used my whole career and probably my whole learning life as well, that has three parts, which is intend, notice, and move.
Mm.
And that same practice dynamic, once hardwired, becomes a way to navigate the complexity, to navigate the uncertainty that is modern life and modern work and modern leadership with greater energy, ease, and effectiveness. Because too often we find ourselves in states of strain, swirl, or stuck.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I like to say is that people are messy, right? And so I love the fact that you say that you can't logic your way through it because as an engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. So you would think that I would be using math and science to manage people, but actually what I've learned is that you can't. And that's actually what I love about people is they are messy and they'll always surprise you in good ways and bad ways, but I've always loved the mystery of what's going to happen next. And like, it doesn't bother me. I've been leading people for 30 years and I actually love the magic of people and the messiness of people. And I've come to really enjoy it, but I love this idea of these three core practices and how they can help us sort of move forward. Can you walk us through how to apply these core principles?
Yeah. Yeah. And so here's the thing, like, just backing up a quick, well, first of all, I just had this thought popped into my head, John. You're the messy, like I love that. The messy mechanical engineer. You wouldn't put those two together.
Yeah.
That makes you like a special unicorn.
Yeah, for special needs, something. I don't know.
Yeah, and so I think that's really, because here's the thing is we need all different kinds of operating and thinking. We tend to in Western business world over index
Yes.
on things that work in complication but don't work in complexity. And then we get frustrated when they don't, and then we do what humans do, is we point out instead of look in. So yes, this practice is really powerful because it is It's agnostic to industry. It's agnostic to role. It can be used as an individual, that's what I'll walk you through. It can be used as teams, I'll explain how, and same thing by organizational cultures. And so intend, notice, and move. The pieces all work together, and any one of the three parts has huge power and benefit. And so one of my favorite quotes, I don't have a source for it, is energy follows intention. Right? And as a bit of a neuroscience nerd as well, I teach a movement practice called educational kinesiology, which helps rewire the brain for greater effectiveness. And I'm a yoga teacher and somatics practitioner as well. And so intention, what happens is when we set an intention, we light up the part of, not only the part of our operating system, our brain, that is the prefrontal cortex, which is our place of higher thinking, of looking to the future, of imagining potential and possibility. We actually also light up a part of our brain called the parietal lobe, which is where we take in and make sense of our sensory experiences. So intentions literally prime our system for forward action, right? Intentions draw us forward. And so, as an example, every single morning when I get up and start my workday, I set an intention for how I want to show up that day. I look at my calendar, I see everything that's going on, and I say, how do I want to show up today? And intentions are related to goals, but they're not the same. Goals are an outcome or a result that are external to us. Intentions are things that actually live within us, and it's the way in which, the dynamic in which we want to approach our goals. So they're hugely powerful because they come right to our own individual locus of control. So that's the first part. Intend draws us forward. So as an example, I did this before our call. Had a very full day, as I imagine you have, lots going on. And so how I wanted to show up was clear and connecting. So that's the first part. The second part of the practice is notice. And I actually believe that noticing is a superpower because we don't do it.
Let's talk about that.
Yes. And so noticing, and when I mean notice, is notice the experience of now. If intention draws us forward, noticing grounds us in the reality of now. And if we do not notice our current experience, we cannot be at choice about what to do next because it's automatic, right? So as an example, my intention coming on this call with you was to be clear and connecting. And when I noticed, I checked in with my whole operating system. I checked in with my thinking, which was all scattered. I checked in with my emotions, my feeling, and I was feeling a bit jittery. And I was checking in with my physical experience, and I was really dehydrated. Right? That current noticing of that experience wasn't going to allow me to show up clear and connecting. Right? I would say the word, and I would say, well, what's the word? The word was I was feeling a bit frazzled. Okay. The great thing is, once I notice I'm frazzled, now I can be a choice what to do about it.
Right.
I don't notice it, it's running the show.
Yeah. So the way you describe it is on an individual basis. So in other words, it's intent individually, notice individually, and then move individually. But I would imagine you would tell us that it also works in a
Yes,
group setting.
I'll share those examples. Yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Because one of the things that I notice with a lot of leaders is they sequester themselves in offices and in conference rooms, and they're busy, right? And so they're never present. So they're never in a position where they actually can notice what's happening. And so they don't know what's happening because they're not present to be able to notice it. And so I think they miss out on, even if they have the best intentions, they're not in a place where they can actually notice what's happening in the team dynamic.
Absolutely. And I mean, if there's, a pandemic that's not going away anytime soon, it's the busy pandemic. In my
Yes.
book, I actually tell a story about how I eliminated that word from my vocabulary in
Ah,
2015
I love that.
and the change that it made.
Yeah.
Busy is a state of mind that stops us from noticing now and using your language. And I just so appreciate how you're putting these pieces together. If we cannot notice now, we cannot be present in the moment,
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that's exactly right. And too many leaders miss out on the present because they're not taking the time to notice. They're isolated and sequestered to the point where they're not around the people that matter. Maybe they're right around there. They might be around their management teams,
Yeah.
right? The yes men and women, but
Mm.
they're not
Mm.
around the people who actually matter.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And it's one of those. So I'll come to like the how do you notice in a group and organizationally in a moment here is noticing a lot of times I notice this is a double noticing. One of the things I notice with organizations very often that I work with is, yeah, they get this notion of intention, set intention, set goals, look ahead. We're all about looking ahead. And then what they want to do right away is move and take action.
Right. Exactly.
And they skip well, I would say the connecting element, the missing element is where are we now for
Mm,
real? And often I find that they do that is because they don't like where the team is right now. They don't like where they are as a leader right now. They don't like where the organization is culturally. Here's the deal. It's already happening. Whether you notice it or not, it's already happening. The moment you notice something, you can be at choice about what to do next.
I love this. I was going to tell you, I was with a company that it was a global company and they had at least the location I was at, very, very poor
Yeah,
morale, very poor
yeah,
culture.
yeah.
Everybody was apathetic. And the company wanted to do something about it, and I was the senior guy on this one site and they wanted me to present their way of fixing it. They wanted to move before they noticed, right? And so what
Mm-hmm.
they did is they said, we noticed this, we think there's some problems, we want to address it. We've given a gift, and we're going to send a box to you, and we're going to give a gift to every employee. And I was like, great, I'll give it out in this. They were doing a big rollout, global
Yeah.
rollout, and I said I'll give it to the employees in the meeting. And I opened up the box in my office when it finally arrived, and it was buttons that said, I love my job.
Oh my gosh.
So the way they were going to move was to give everybody buttons that says, that we love our job, but they didn't really notice why people were apathetic and didn't like their job. They didn't spend the time to understand what the problems were. They were going to try to solve it with a button. And
Yeah.
I left the company shortly after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you did, and I'm really happy to hear that you did, right? Like
Yeah.
it is, and it's, you know, that makes me think about like I just had this moment, I just noticed. Imagine if I were that employee and I received that button.
Yeah.
It wouldn't feel like a gift. It would feel like a push, right?
Yeah.
And and it comes back to this notion of mattering.
Hmm.
Is mattering matters. And again, I went through the years of the pandemic, I was hearing the word matter a lot. We're connecting with what matters to us. We're prioritizing what matters. So I again did some Google research and found a bunch of definitions. And the one I put together is that matter is a thing, right? Like you can get your hands around it. And matter is a thing that is of substance and or significance, usually both. And then it made me think about this notion that I now share literally with everyone I work with, is that we all need to mattering matters. We all need to contribute something of substance, something that matters, and we all need to know we matter or we're significant as we do it. And so often when I work with organizations that will say to me, "Oh, our people, they don't want it, they're disengaged, they don't want to get involved, they da 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 da." It's because the people don't believe they matter.
Yeah.
They don't
That's it.
believe they're contributing things of substance. They're not
Yeah.
connected to the mission, as you referred to earlier, and they don't believe they're significant
Yeah. Yeah.
because their leaders are too busy in their offices or on their phones or rolling out programs, right? When we do to people, we get compliance. When we do with them, we get commitment, you know?
Yes.
And so, right? You're speaking my language.
Yeah, I think, and again, I think it comes down to we have to, as leaders, like I said, go into, like you mentioned, go into work with an intention. Like, how am I going to be today?
Yeah.
And then, when it comes to relating to people, and I think it's Ken Blanchard who said we've got to notice, we got to catch people doing the right thing, right?
Yes.
And so, like, and that requires you to be present, and it requires you to notice the people who are stepping up, to notice the people who are
Yes.
doing the things that are helping us move our business forward. And then we have to, and that creates the culture as we acknowledge those people who are helping us move our business forward, and we celebrate those that are doing it. Then that becomes our culture, that becomes the norm, that becomes like, we're moving the culture in a direction
Yes.
where we're acknowledging what matters, and the people are doing things that are meaningful towards our objectives. So I think, to me, it seems like these are connected to culture, right? It
They
creates.
absolutely are. Like you're already answering the question that I don't need to answer now is how do you use intend, notice, and move around culture,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Is you just said it, right? Is what is the culture like? What is the organization that people are going to want to come to and what makes them proud,
Hmm.
right? You
Yeah,
know, one of my favorite questions to ask in organizations is tell me about a time when you were most proud to be a member of this organization.
yeah, yeah.
And underneath the story, you hear what matters. You hear what people value. I never go into an organization and say, "Tell me what your corporate values are."
Yes, yeah.
It's tell me about a time. And that's how you find out what's real for people. And then the move that you identified there is celebrate progress.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I have this non-mathematical formula. It's not accurate at all. But I say culture is the sum total of what we celebrate, C to the 10, and what we tolerate, T to the 100.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for saying that. And can you repeat that? Because I think that's really, really important.
Yeah,
One more
culture is
time.
the sum total of what we celebrate, C to the 10, and what we tolerate, T to the 100.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's exactly
Right?
right. Because if we're tolerating, whatever behavior we tolerate becomes our minimum standard, right? So that
It,
is now acceptable, and everybody knows it.
it's
Yeah.
the way we really, I know they told you in corporate what our values are, but here's how we really do things.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
And then it's so interesting too, just on this notion of celebration is so often I find leaders are so well intentioned, like really, pardon me, really well intentioned. They can definitely hone their noticing muscle and notice a name, right? Like say, hey everyone, it feels a bit crunchy in here right now. Is that just me? What do you notice?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because again, the minute we name it, because again, you know, in culture, the things that most powerfully drive it are often unconscious, implicit, and invisible. And
Yes.
so when we can make things conscious, explicit, and visible, again, now we can do something with it,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
intention, right? So you can see how these all kind of come together. And so, you know, I'll see these leaders, you know, work with leaders and teams and organizations that are so well intentioned and people that are doing great work. And we'll talk about, you know, celebrating progress. And I think part of the challenge is this continuous mindset that we're in, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's, oh yeah, but we can always do better.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so my thing is always, okay, if you celebrate progress, like here's the thing, it's already happening. It's way easier to keep something that you want to have happen moving forward than stop something in a direction you don't want it to go or start someone from still.
Yeah.
Like and leaders, we don't have time. Like, I mean, there's, people's calendars are bananas and all of these things. And people will say, well, we don't have time to do it. And all it takes is a just say thanks.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
John, I noticed, in that meeting when things got really uncomfortable, you spoke up and it showed everyone it's actually okay to do that. So
Yeah.
thank you. That's
Yeah.
it. That's all it
Yeah.
takes. It's
Simple.
so small. It's so simple.
Yeah.
And it takes just a moment, right? So
Yeah.
I teach leaders often about this creating moments of mattering
Yeah.
because culture, a life, a team, a family is really a collection of moments
I
and a
love
series
that.
of moments that build on each other.
I absolutely love that. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and we sort of just skimmed the surface of this.
You
And
went
but I,
everywhere. It was so
but
fun.
but it was just so powerful, and I do love the idea of how do we harness that potential? How do we get people to, to get to this higher level because it's there, it exists, and we've got to bring it out,
Right
and that's our
now, like
role.
it's here right now.
Yeah. So we need to be able to bring it out. That's our jobs as leaders. So this has been
Absolutely.
fantastic. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Hmm. I would say to do any of this, it requires a pause. And there's a saying about, the place of possibility is where we find possibility, or in my language, potential, is where in your B word, I'm not going to use the word because I eliminated the word, but BUSY, in your BUSY life and work, might you build in some small pauses to get clear on your intention, notice where you are now, and decide your next step? Because while there's so many things you can do, the only thing you can do in the moment is the next thing. So keep it simple.
I love that. That is powerful advice. Leaders, if you're hearing that, look for a chance to pause, look for a
Mhm.
chance to get off the treadmill, go
Yeah.
to that quiet spot in the back of your office or the back of your factory, like I have, and do a little thinking and see where your
Mhm.
brain's at, see where your team's at. Get
Yeah.
your right intention, then get out there and start noticing and moving. But
Yeah.
yeah, take that time to pause. Very, very
Can I share one
powerful
little
advice.
quick practice?
Sure.
Okay, so when you take that pause, again, I'm a yoga teacher and I do a lot of work with the breath. Is I breathe in, I'm ready. I breathe out, I'm relaxed.
Yeah.
The in breath activates the part of the nervous system, the sympathetic, that gets us ready for action. The exhale activates the part of the nervous system that allows us to relax in action. Breathe in, I am ready. Breathe out, I'm relaxed.
I
There's
love it.
today's yoga lesson.
Well, listeners, we got a yoga lesson as well as a leadership lesson today. So you get a double feature today. So it's fantastic.
Remember, our
Absolutely love
brains
it.
don't roll into work. We show up in our whole system, our whole body. So,
100%. Yeah, exactly. Very, very true. Well, this has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about you and your company?
oh, thank you for asking me that. My listeners, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out social wise, is on LinkedIn. Pam August on LinkedIn. You can find me at connectingpotential.ca, because I am in Canada, although I travel all over the world for work. And you can find my book on any major book retailer, or Amazon's always easy.
That sounds good. And we're going to go ahead and put links in the show notes for all of Pam's resources. And if something really stood out to you in this conversation, I really highly recommend that you reach out to Pam. We'll have her LinkedIn connection right here. Reach out to her. Say, hey, you heard her on Deep Leadership Podcast and you've got questions.
Yeah, I'd love
Or
to.
if you're interested in diving deeper, the book is available. It's called Potential: How to Connect What's Already There for Exponential Impact. And we all want exponential impact, and we all want to release the potential of our teams. Well, Pam's book is going to help you make that happen. So, Pam, I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing all of your knowledge about this really important topic.
Well, thank you, John. I feel like this conversation really was an act of co-creation. And so I look forward to listening back to extract some new insights that came from what we created between us.
Absolutely. I always listen to my podcast episodes, and I always hear things that I didn't hear the first time. So it's always important to listen to them because there's so much wisdom being shared, and I really appreciate it. So thanks again for coming on the show. Thanks again for
Thank
writing this
you.
book and the work that you're doing.
Thank you, John.
Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.